Welcome to this guide to rule the waves to super large legacy fleets. When I did a little playthrough with Germany, done very small, a couple of you commented that you were daunted by the super large size. And when you're doing super large, it doesn't get any larger than Britain. So here we tackle that head on and try and make it simpler and easy for you to enjoy a game on the biggest scale possible. My name's Dickie, and this is my Wargames channel, where I like to explore some of the games I love to play. Let's have a little look at how to think about the problem. And I recommend, first of all, you consider that there are really two fleets involved here. So let's just do a little comparison. You've really got a colonial fleet and a battle fleet. And the colonial fleet is very different. It's full of small ships. They're dispersed hither and thither around the world. They are low capability, they are long lasting, and they are as cheap as possible. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it quite hard to design this kind of ship because I naturally want to make my ships the biggest and the best. And here, counterintuitively, you're having to do pretty much the opposite. The battle fleet, however, is our natural domain. They're big ships, they're concentrated at home or sent off to the enemy's home sea zone. They're full of high capability ships, they're often updated, whereas in the colonial fleet you'll probably only update the anti-submarine fit of when they're not first class ships anymore. You can either scrap them or send them off to your colonial fleet to replace ships in your colonial fleet that have grown so old that they are absolutely useless. And of course, they're going to be expensive. So two very different fleets. That's the first problem. The second problem is Britain is rich. I mean, honestly, really rich. You get loads of money. 1,484,496. Let's call it $1.5 million to play with. You've got a lot of things to do with that. A lot of fun to have, and you can create a wonderfully large, expansive fleet as a consequence. But it does mean you do have to think about how you're going to spend your money. Now, it's perfectly fine. If you just want to splurge as if you just suddenly won the lottery, yeah, absolutely go ahead. But if you want to min-max it, or if you want to have a more considered fleet, then you have to think a little bit more carefully about how you're going to spend your money. I personally like to work backwards. So down the bottom here, we've got our big fat total of how much we've got to play with. But I like to start with, well, how much do I not want to spend? How much do I want to keep in my funds? I suggest about 5,000, maybe 4, perhaps 3 min. The reason being that early on, when you've just built your legacy fleet, your monthly balance is likely to go negative. So you're going to need a little bit of ready cash on hand. Plus, there are certain things that you can't do with the legacy fleet build. You can't extend your docks, you can't set up your intelligence, you can't commit to your research, you can't do any advanced training. So again, you might want to have some of that spending done after you've done your legacy fleet. So if we, for the sake of argument, keep £5,000 back, then we're going to have 22,000 to spend on ships under construction. As you know, the legacy fleet is split between ships already built and ships under construction. You actually get this 27,000 to carry over. So that's where the 22 and the 5 come together, and you can change these two to suit your own personal needs. Taking 27,000 away from this big fat total leaves us with Britain at super large size with 1,457,496 to actually spend on building our legacy fleet, both our colonial fleet and our battle fleet. Now, the battle fleet isn't really a super problem. You just want the biggest and the best and the most powerful that you can possibly have. And the colonial fleet is really a bit of a drag on that. It's spending you don't really want to do, but you have to do because Britain is very rich. But its third problem is that it's got a lot of responsibilities. It has by far the largest foreign station requirement. The graph, I think, speaks for itself. 171,000 tons need to be placed on foreign stations. And it's worse than that, because one of Britain's national characteristics is that it is a global naval power. And the requirement of a global naval power is that 10% of its fleet tonnage is deployed outside of home waters. Now, luckily, the 171,000 on foreign station goes a long way towards satisfying that condition. But often, particularly if you've used a lot of small ships, there will be an extra bit on top. I've found typically something in the region of another 15,000 is needed on top of this 171,000. So that's a lot of ships to commit to not being in your battle fleet. How to handle that? I think of splitting it down into what's needed to fill these two requirements, particularly the foreign tonnage requirement. Here's Britain's foreign tonnage requirement, and as you can see, it's extensive. They need to be in 10 of the 14 sea zones. They need to support within those 10 sea zones 33 colonies, plus Ireland in home waters, and 51 bases and another 2 in Ireland. Now, one tactic is basically to say, sod it. I'm just going to build my fleet, and then I'm just going to put ships on foreign stations and let the AI do it for me. And that will keep life really simple. It's a very expensive option because you are committing battle fleet quality ships to go and swan around around the globe. And the AI will send your ships on foreign stations all over the shop. When you send a ship on foreign station, it can be anywhere around the globe, and it actually counts for your foreign station requirement. However, a much more cost-effective solution is to send your ships to each of these sea zones and put them on active fleet status whilst they're in these sea zones. This allows you, in wartime, to put them on other missions, such as trade protection or raiding. And that's a much better use of your money. So, how to do that? Well, I think of it almost as colonial fleet ships as either Lego bricks or bits of money. The tonnages are the things that you want. So I've stripped back the map. Here are all the areas we need to do, and I would build a series of standardized colonial ship designs just to make things easier. I want a 10,000 ton battleship, mainly for this Mediterranean requirement. I want a 6,000 ton light cruiser. Now you can see the actual, in bold, the actual displacement is different. And I will put above my my video on how to design foreign station ships and the algorithms that go into the quite complicated calculation behind that. I also want some 2,000 ton for foreign service gunboats, some corvettes done really large that are only designed for foreign service, and then some 900. 800 would be optimal. That would give me 1,000 tons, but for a trivial amount of money, I don't want to lose the extra anti-submarine capability. So a 900 ton corvette. So with these 4 different ship types, I can assign them around the world as necessary. So say here, which is West Africa, I could just send one 6,000 ton protected cruiser, job done. Northeast Asia, a cruiser and a couple of gunboats will sort it. So thinking like this just helps to make the whole thing a little bit easier. Here is a pattern I've drawn up using this scheme. Now, it is just a suggested scheme. By all means, take it either way. This is kind of like a middling approach. You could go cheaper, and you could just go, I'm not going to build Colonial cruisers, and I'm certainly not going to build Colonial pre-dreadnoughts. And I'm just going to build these kind of patrol boats and maybe some anti-submarine or minesweeping corvettes and just fill a whole lot. And that would be much, much cheaper because particularly these Colonial gunboats are as cheap as chips when you calculate their lifetime cost. Their build plus how much it costs to maintain them. So I strongly recommend that's a very, very doable and inexpensive way to build a Colonial fleet. Admittedly, they'll all be rubbish and they'll have little extra capability to offer, but they do sort the problem. Or you could go the other way. You could go more capable and build more cruisers, or indeed bigger cruisers and more Colonial battleships. Much more expensive, but gives you a secondary fleet for things like conducting invasions, mean that your main battle fleet doesn't have to sail overseas if it wants to invade an area outside of home waters. Choice is yours. Here are what my Colonial fleet builds look like, those 4 different classes. So my second-rate dreadnought, I built a couple for the Mediterranean, 12,000 tons, only 10,000 on Colonial, but that's fine. Low freeboard. Now, I don't generally recommend low freeboard, but it does save a lot of weight. And having the small weight, the lighter armour and the low freeboard really saves you money. 42,000. Normally, a pre-dreadnought would cost you something in the region of 55,000. And because these aren't really battle units, I mean, arguably, I could have gone down to 16 knots. Because they're not really designed for fighting battles, speed doesn't really matter. For the gunboats and the corvettes, I've gone down to 17 knots. They all help to reduce the cost. Feels funny, I admit, because I assume most of you, like to make our ships the most powerful, but keeping your eye on how much it costs and really trying to push that down is a great exercise when designing your Colonial fleet. So these are the bits that you've got to play with. Next, I'm going to swap over and show you a spreadsheet that I've developed that helps me work all the numbers involved, because sadly there are quite a lot of numbers because you've got so much money to play with. So here we are in my spreadsheet. It's designed to stop the big numbers involved in creating your legacy fleet for Britain getting out of control. There's quite a bit to it, but you don't have to use all of it. It's fine if you use just the first 2 bits to give you a sense of what to build, and then go back to rule the waves and just use your seat of your pants for designing the rest of it. Let me take you through the whole thing. So first of all, in step 1, we put in the basic parameters that you've got to play with. So what's the total budget? What are you allowed to carry forward from building your legacy fleets? That's 27,000. How much money would you like remaining in your funds at the end of the whole process, so that you've got money for other stuff and are able to fund any deficit in the monthly balance, which is quite likely to happen? If you choose 4,000 as in here, then you'll have 23,000 to play with out of this 27,000. For ships under construction. Together, that will leave you with 1,457,496 to actually play with to build legacy fleet ships directly. And then finally, I've added in the Colonial tonnage requirement. So those are your givens. Over here, step 2 is a rough planner. So what this does is it allows you to put in the percentages of, I would like 40% of my fleet to be battleships for the battle fleet. That's what these names are here. Battle fleet battleships, Colonial fleet battleships, battle fleet armoured cruisers, and so on. And that will give you the total amount of money you will spend on, say, battleships. And then you can add in a rough number of ships you want to build, and that will give you how much they cost. And it lets you go, oh, if I want 10 battleships at 40% of my budget on battleships, they're going to cost around 50 million each. So I better, or 50,000 each, I better not over-design them. And if you only use this rough fleet planner, I think you'll get a lot of sense and order brought to your legacy fleet design process. However, in step 3, if you wish, you can actually design ships and mark down their cost. And then at the end of it, when it says, do you want to go to build them? You say no. You build all of your different classes, and then you play around with the numbers and how much they all cost and whether you are over or under budget compared to what your estimates were above. Here I notice any notable features like their Colonial or their low freeboard and stuff like that. And again, you could stop at this. But if you wanted to check that your Colonial requirements, your foreign station requirements were being met, then you could go to step 4. In step 4, I list out the tonnage, I work out the Colonial tonnage that represents using these modifiers over here, using these rules, based on the video I did before about how to do foreign station ships. And it tells you what percentage they would give you for every class of ships, which is interesting. But actually what you need to know is, does your Colonial fleet actually match your Colonial requirement? And then finally, in step 5, if you wish, you can use this tool to work out how to use that remaining money to build ships under construction. So you note down the cost of all the actual designs. This is from a set I've already done previously. And then you toy with, well, I could have 5 battleships or I could have 3 light cruisers, and seeing how much money you've got left. I've crossed out the coastal fortifications here because although you can build them during the under construction phase, you don't get the 45% off. Under construction is brilliant because you pay only 5% of the cost. You pay 50% of the cost in monthly installments over the next 10, 15, whatever it is, months that the ship takes to build. And you get 45% of the cost of the vessel for free. Who doesn't love 45% off? What a bargain, but you don't get that bargain with coastal fortifications. I've included the coastal fortifications up here and here just as a prompt. You may not wish to build them. I mean, there are more than this, of course, as you're aware, but I think these are useful sizes. You could replace the 9-inch with a 10-inch or an 8-inch, depending on what you fancy. But if I was about to start the game as Britain with a super large fleet, and I say wanted to try and provoke a war with the United States as soon as possible, because the United States is only going to get wealthier and wealthier during the course of the game, then I might want to start the game with defences for Nova Scotia and New Brunswick built up, possibly also Bermuda and some of the Caribbean islands. So it might be worthwhile in your fleet, legacy fleet planning exercise to pop in a few of these. And that's it, really. What are your constraints? What roughly are the percentages that you'd like to spend to shape your fleet out? What, when you go down into the detail of your fleet, are you actually able to build? Does that meet your foreign station requirements? And then how do you optimize your under construction? So yeah, it's a slightly complicated spreadsheet. It has a few helpers. So over here, for example, is a list of all the different areas that Britain has to provide colonial ships and the tonnage requirement from that, just to help you later on when you actually go to send ships around the world. But fundamentally, it's, I think, not as complicated as it looks. So let's work it out. I've pre-filled in step 1. The only ones you might want to change is this number for, well, okay, I only want 3,000 tons. Hooray! That gives me 4,000 tons to play with. Otherwise, it's pretty set. Over here, you can work out what you would like your fleet shape to be like. Now, the temptation is to go from the top. Yeah, let's have 50% of all of our money spent on battleships, because we love battleships. That's great. Yeah, that will give us that. And then, well, if we built 12 battleships, they would cost 60,000 each. Now, over here, I've done this rough guide, and a 16,000 ton British battleship, first-rate battleship, costs about 55. So, okay, so that probably means I can get 13. Yes, I can get 13 for that number if I spend 50% of my budget. So it's a great tool for what-ifing. The only way of doing this within Rule the Waves itself is to build all the ships, decide that you don't like the shape of the fleet that you've built, scrap the lot and start again, which obviously is a great bore. The way that I usually use this is to start from the bottom. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to say no to coastal fortifications. Watch this. I keep on doing this. Don't do 0.5 for 0.5%. Do 0.5. If you do 0.5, it thinks you mean 50%. 0.5. And then you're stuck with it. Sorry about that. That's just the weird way that Google Sheet works. So 0.5 and 0.5 for anti-submarine colonial cruisers. You could build none, or you could just build minesweepers and wait until submarines become available. It's fine. If I've built that, then I'll do 14% for Colonial patrol gunboats. These battle fleet torpedo boats are just a little experiment I'm running on the side. I've read in the forums about building 300-ton destroyers. I hadn't really thought about that before, so I'm just playing with that. So I'll just give that 0.5. 0.5 for your normal 500-ton destroyers. Colonial light cruisers, so let's try 14% for them, see how we get. Now you can see with that we've already used 30%. So we can't go too crazy with the rest. 10% for colonial battleships, and that leaves us with 35% for the battleships. So that's a guess. Let's go see what the numbers could be. So if we had 10 battle fleet battleships, they would cost 51,000, which is a little bit under the guide price over here. So let's take that up to 37%. Okay, 38%. Yeah, okay. Now we're 3% over, so we may have to change that. I think 10 is a nice number. Now for the colonial battleships, we only want 2 to go to the Mediterranean. Right, well there you go. So they're certainly not going to cost 72,000. So we can bring this down to, well, let's halve it. Too little. 6. Yeah, that's about right. 40,000, 43,000. Yeah, that will do. So that's pulled it back. Battle fleet armoured cruisers. I have a personal preference for monster ones. I really spend ridiculous amounts of money on my armoured cruisers. You don't have to follow that pattern. Let's see if we can manage 5. No, we cannot manage 5. I'll hold it there and just see how we do with the others. For the fleet light cruisers, fancy 6. 24,000 I actually haven't modelled. I've done a small armoured cruiser in my estimates and a 4,800 one. 24,000 will give you like a 6,000 ton cruiser, you know, perfectly nice. Let's go on with the colonial cruisers themselves. So we needed 12. And that comes out at 17,000, which is pretty close. Destroyers, I really don't want many. Let's see, yeah, 5. Okay, so that's a bit too much for them. These are only going to cost 1,000. I could either build more and bring the price down, there, like 7. The colonial gunboats, we need 37, and they're going to cost not as much as that. They are going to cost 2,500, 2,600, something like that. So That's going to give us quite a bit of budget back. Let's take it down to 12. Let's take it down to 10. Oh, okay. Let's take it down to 8. You can see what a bargain these are. 6. Nope. 7. Okay, 7. That's a little high, but it's fine. We only needed 5 of them. That's a reasonable. It's a bit low actually, but it's a reasonable price. And 5 of them. Again, that's a little bit low. Good news, we're only using 92%, so we can squander our money as we wish. To recap, the battleship is fine. The Colonial battleship is fine. The armored cruiser. So let's fix this. I'm gonna give myself 20% for my beloved Nutter armored cruisers. Yeah, 58,000 is a bit more like it. But if we take it to 23, 67,000. Yeah, that's the kind of crazy figure I love. And that's good enough. You can play with this to your nth degree. What would be like if you seriously rammed up your battle fleet, for example, your battleships. But and you could stop there confident that you had a reasonable shape in your navy, and you just have to tweak it a little bit depending upon the actual cost of these designs. And you can use these figures as guides to how many you want to build. You could use step 3 to actually register how much the individual ships really costed. The coastal fortifications are in red because they are fixed costs. So I've recorded here how many ships I've actually built in the past. That's what that little side note is. So let's just go through and see how that works out. 37. I didn't build any of those in 5. And there we are. Here is the actual spend per class of ships. This 26,504 would be the funds remaining after I built these 87 ships. And here is the difference between what I actually spent and then up here what I originally planned to spend. So as you can see, I've got an overspend of nearly £500, which is fine. It's never going to get perfect. If it's just a few £100, you can live with it. Better a slight overspend than an underspend, because it'll chop that off and you'll only get 27,000 taken across, and any underspend is wasted. I mean, unless the underspend is like £10 or something. So I was pretty happy with that. And that allowed me to go in and have a look at, did this meet my foreign station requirements? Short answer, yes. 100.4% of foreign stations were sorted by my Colonial battleships, my Colonial cruisers, my Colonial gunboats, and by my Colonial anti-submarine ships. I didn't build any minesweepers. So hooray for that. So the way this one works is you have to register what the tonnage actually is. Hopefully it won't deviate too much from that. You have to enter in the formula relevant to this, which you can pick up from my previous video. It will then tell you how much of your foreign station got modified and what percentage. So, I mean, if I sent my battleships out on foreign stations, they alone would account for 54%. This number, by the way, is picking up on how many were actually built. You could use a simplified version of this step 4, which is to ignore the battle fleet and just register your Colonial fleet and just check that your Colonial fleet is in fact doing the business. Interestingly here, you can see that 10% of my foreign station requirements is being absorbed by those 2 battleships at a cost. It's expensive. 42% is being absorbed by those 12 cruisers. But those cruisers cost something like twice as much per ton than the gunboats. Now, the cruisers are obviously much, much, much more capable. But capable of what? Well, they're capable of engaging armed merchant raiders. They're capable of engaging weaker light cruisers or protected cruisers sent on raiding. They are capable of contributing to invasion totals. They are capable of fighting engagements with your enemy if they have ships in the same foreign stations, assuming you haven't put them onto trade protection. But you could take the view that instead of 40% being done by the light cruisers, you could build another 37 patrol gunboats at 1,600 tons and save yourself quite a bit of money and use that saving to increase the number of protected cruisers in your battle fleet. Choice is yours. It's just that doing it this way makes that kind of question obvious. So that's step 4, and it's usually pretty quick. Do watch out these formulas, and you're picking the right one to represent the right thing. And then finally, under step 5, note down all of the costs to build ships under construction. Obviously, at the end of step 4, you'd have pressed continue, and it would have said, "Are you sure?" Yes, I am sure. And then play around with what you'd like to build. So I, in this exercise, decided to build this profile of ships. So as you can see, I've actually spent 20,000 tons for ships under construction. I've got 6,000 tons remaining. My target was 3,000. Now, I could build another light cruiser for that. That will take you, or I could build a couple more. It's not unreasonable. You are getting 45% off these ships. It's a bargain. Play around with it and decide how much you want left. And that's it, really. This is a way of delivering a fleet that, when it's all built, looks like this. Ship after ship after ship, plus another load, all in construction. And here we are in January 1900, all ready to go, having built nearly 90 ships with a lot of money. I hope that's an approach that makes things simpler for you. As I said, if necessary, just use this rough fleet planner to organize your thoughts before you delve in. But if you want to really pay attention to what you're building, then by all means, use the whole spreadsheet. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it useful to think of the exercise as being building 2 separate fleets, a battle fleet and a colonial fleet. Don't be afraid. One final tip, leave yourself time. You can't save the game until you've completed all of your legacy fleet construction and all of your under construction, and you hit January 1900. So it's going to take a good hour-ish or more to work all this out, particularly if you enjoy yourself over fleet design. As you can see, we've got quite a number of ships to design because you've got these 2 different fleets. So I would give yourself at least a couple of hours time free to do this before you get to a point where you can save. And that's it. I hope that's helpful. Stay safe. Next time, I'm probably going to look at gunnery, although I've also got some stuff on lifetime costs of ships, particularly the corvettes, to help you think about that, and several others in preparation. But for now, thank you for watching, and give it a like if you found it useful, to tell YouTube that other rule the ways people might find it useful too. Thanks, and goodbye.